Welcome to the next episode of After Office Hours. We are your hosts. I am Sean Eide. I'm a professor at Baylor University, and with my co-host, Hayden Garrick, in finance at Microsoft. Today we're going to be talking about Steve Jobs and where would Apple be without Toy Story. So Hayden's going to get us started going down that rabbit trail.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Great to be back, everybody. We appreciate you tuning in again. This is likely going to be a multi-part episode, and if you haven't listened to the first episode, it might give you some background into some of the things we're going to discuss. So maybe throw a pause on this episode, play that one, and come right back. We'll be happy to have you in both. So, yeah, Sean, so getting started here, almost everybody knows, right? Steve Jobs, founder of Apple, had some great successes early on, especially as the Apple II came out. It was kind of what picked them up commercially. And then they were looking for the next big thing, Steve Jobs' kind of personal project, right? He starts working on the Macintosh. That comes out in 1984. Big, memorable Super Bowl commercial. First time you can really put the computer on your desk and anybody can use it. It's got the keyboard, it's got the mouse, and there's some things maybe stolen, maybe borrowed, maybe inspired from some other amazing computers at the time, right? But mostly it's all packaged up into the Macintosh. So somewhat of a success, right? Not super awesome, especially as the Mac starts to get a little bit aged and some more market demands are coming out. Steve Jobs brings on former Pepsi CEO John Sculley, who he thinks is going to really take Apple to the next level. He sort of admits to himself maybe he's not the best person to continue to lead Apple. That being Steve Jobs admits that to himself and really takes that step. It's really difficult for him. He thinks about it a lot and he finds John Sculley and he really thinks this could be our guy. So he convinces him on one of his famous walks that you'll hear a lot about if you know anything about Steve Jobs. He always takes these walks for all of his meetings. And John Sculley's not sure, and essentially Steve Jobs sells him by saying, John, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to be on the edge of new technology? And, that's not a direct quote, but that's the idea. So
what you're saying is we've got Steve Jobs, because Hayden knows a lot more about this than I do with Steve Jobs' background. But we have Steve Jobs who co-developed this amazing hardware, but then brought in Sculley to run the business side. Is that right?
Yeah. So Jobs, the two Steves, Jobs and Wozniak, are working on this machine. And he's thinking, okay, I think I want to be the visionary for the Mac and the computers. Let's bring in John Sculley as the CEO. He can run the business things. He obviously knows more than me. Plus, I like engineering a little bit, being a visionary.
Gotcha. So we've got Steve Jobs. He's wanting to run the product development side. And we've got this mindset that let's bring in this business CEO tycoon that's going to bring us to the next level. What happened from there?
So over the years, right, Sean, things start going out of Steve Jobs' favor. He gets kind of pre-exiled to a campus building that's kind of far away from what's going on, where they're working on the Macintosh and future things there. And at first he's kind of happy with that. He thinks, okay, I can focus on it and not have anybody disrupting me. But he quickly realizes they've kind of put him there so he can't be in the office with them, as he's notoriously difficult to work with and work for the people working for him. So there's a little bit that happens in between, and then there's a kind of a scuffle between him and Sculley. They really disagree on some of the strategy of what Apple should be, especially with some things like products being offered, strategy, customer segments, etc. And they essentially go to the board, and Steve Jobs comes in really confident and says, this is my company. And John is kind of taking it in a direction I don't want to go. And sort of surprisingly to Steve, the board sides with Sculley. And just like that, he's diminished. He's not really having too many responsibilities anymore. And he's kind of being pushed out. So at 30 years old, he leaves Apple and leaves the company behind that he put everything into and he founded just a handful of years earlier.
Do you know how much of Apple he owned at that time?
I don't know exactly how much, but I do know that he had a pretty sizable portion.
And he cashed that all out, didn't he?
Yeah, he didn't have much of any of it left when he went out to his next step. A little bit of a preview there, but yeah, he kind of got rid of it and said, you know what, I'm done with this. So,
Gotcha. Yeah, I was reading a bit up on this last night, and it sounds like from what I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, they never formally ousted him. They just kept on diminishing him more and more and more, and encouraged him strongly to leave. Does that sound about right?
yeah, nobody was there telling him, Steve, get out, right? And part of that was because he was the founder, he was the visionary. A lot of the early products he kind of guided, right? And were his own idea. And so they weren't just going to fully kick him out, but they definitely were making his life pretty difficult and unfun for him.
Well, they probably thought they were justified because he was making their life difficult.
That's true. Yeah, he was notoriously rude and hard to work with. Being somebody who was working for him, you could have heard the words, "you suck," "that sucks," quite a bit. How could you even think this was a good idea? Things that he would say for people working on projects for months, weeks. They would tell him this thing took a year to develop, and he would go, "It sucks. You have a month to fix it." So they were kind of miserable working under him.
Gotcha. So it was a mix of the Macintosh. I mean, who was the Macintosh originally pitched to? The everyday consumer, professionals? Who was it being pitched to?
Yeah, they were aiming the Macintosh towards the home user. Somewhat of the early computers, right, were real focused on enthusiasts who were happy to put their own code on it, were happy to have a machine that required tinkering and messing around with, especially some of the ones that they had in the homebrew computer club and all that kind of stuff, which Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were both in at the time. And then Steve Jobs really said, I think there's a market for a home computer that you unbox, plug in, and start using. And so that's really what they were hoping for with the Macintosh.
So Steve Wozniak really developed a product with the end user in mind, saying, hey, let's make something that an everyday home user can plug into their wall and tinker with in their own home. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and they really didn't have to. The operating system, the mouse operations, keyboards was all set up, ready to go. You didn't have to do any of that separately. The screen was included in that one beige case, white case, Steve Jobs would call it. I think they called it moon gray, some sort of beigey white thing. And yeah, really just for a home user to plug in and set up, trying to be simplistic, trying to get mass market share.
So where did they go from here? What was the next step?
Yeah, so Steve Jobs at this point is out, and he's kind of looking for his next thing. And he decides he's not going to stop. He's going to start a new company. He's done it before. Why can't he do it again? So the company that he starts, Sean, as you know, is Next Computer. He starts this company Next with the goal of building high-end computers for universities, professionals, researchers, and he is looking for a premium product outside of kind of the home user, targeted towards professors, universities, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. So what I was reading is when he started Next, he went with a couple other individuals as well. There's a few people from Apple who went with him. How did that all transpire as far as starting Next?
Yeah, so he puts together this company. He's got kind of a band of people with him. People have seen, he starts up Apple. He's got a good track record at this point, right? So they really focus on putting together what they considered the next generation of computers. Steve Jobs was trying to think of it as the next step beyond Apple, trying to take market share that they didn't have. And they made a really advanced operating system for this computer. Huge projects at the time, research projects, animations, renderings, quick research, everything was supposed to be done on this computer. And the next computer was pretty striking in looks. It was very powerful. It was years ahead of the other competitors in the space. And on paper, it seems like I can imagine a ton of people would want this computer. But then you realize this thing was super expensive. It was around $10,000. There was a very small market for it, most of which were somewhat resistant to a computer or didn't have a budget to buy a computer at the time. And they really had pretty poor sales. And I think at this point, you can see Next is on the brink of failure. And I think a lesson here that Steve Jobs learns was he really relied on his own vision and his own intuition of what people would want at Apple. And it worked out for him in most cases. And here, I think he really put two and two together that just building the best product doesn't always mean that customers are ready. Wouldn't you agree, Sean?
You've got to have the product that's the right product at the right time for the right group of people. And I think you see that too. And I wanted to pull up a few numbers here. He left Macintosh or Apple right around 1984. Is that right?
He launches the Mac in 84 and he leaves a little while
85?
after that. I think so.
Steve Jobs is constantly looking at the end user. Who is the end user and who are the individuals that are consuming this product? Do you feel like they lost sight of that a little bit with Next?
I think they really thought they had it. I think they thought this is going to be the next big thing. This is going to be a huge market. And I'm not sure they actually talked to enough people or tried to really see if a $10,000 computer was going to fit into the academic space. And that's $10,000 at that time, back in the 90s time. So that would be quite a bit more expensive today. And most universities, unless it's for a very, very specific project or goal, is not going to want to do that. And some private research firms are also very tight on budgets, especially when they're in R&D stages. And I just don't think they looked into enough of their customers or customers they thought existed.
Gotcha. So he's exploring this next machine, the next cube, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the first one that they built? The only one that they built?
They had another workstation, I think. I don't remember the exact name. But I think the next cube was really the one they sold out. And it was supposed to be this perfect cube, and he obsessed over the angles and the internal brackets and things to hold it together perfectly. And again, showing the same obsession that he showed with the Macintosh, just this time with more price behind it.
Gotcha. And so that wasn't his only endeavor. Another endeavor that we're going to look at is right around the exact same time that he was starting up Next, he made a big purchase. The big purchase that he made was in 1986. He purchased the graphic division of Lucasfilms, which specifically is about animation and the graphics behind those wonderful Star Wars movies that we've seen that were cutting edge for their time. And now we look back at them and we kind of laugh a little bit because, by golly, Jabba the Hutt doesn't even move. But, they were definitely cutting edge for their time, but they were quite kind of wavering, if you will. You've got Star Wars has kind of wrapped up and they're not producing any more movies anytime soon. And Steve Jobs looks at the graphics division of Lucasfilms and says to himself, hey, they are at the cutting edge of graphic development, or they're at the cutting edge of the integration of art and technology. Of art and technology. And I think that's one of the underlying themes of Steve Jobs' life, if you will, is the marriage of art and technology. Would you agree with that, Hayden?
Yeah. Yeah, I think he has a real knack for business and he loves technology and he thinks it makes a great business, which it obviously does for him. But he's also a fan of the arts and he's big into that. And combining the two things is the reason why he continues to pump money into what they rename Pixar, even after they realize it loses money. And we think of Pixar today, Sean, as a movie animation studio, but that's not really what they thought of Pixar being at the time when Steve put a $10 million check into it, right?
Right.
Do you know what they were focusing
Yeah.
on? What they thought was going to happen?
They were working on developing a computer or a machine for graphics production. They thought,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we're going to build this machine that people can purchase, that animation studios can purchase. And when they purchase this, they will be able to animate whatever it is that they need to animate. They'll be able to do the rendering that is needed. And they put together this phenomenal machine with, you were talking about the $10,000 price tag. This price tag, this hardware. So Steve Jobs made hardware over at Next. He's coming over to this Lucasfilm graphics division, trying to
Mm-hmm.
get behind the hardware that they're developing. The price tag of $100,000 for this machine, and it wasn't functioning the way that it needed to function at the price tag that they were asking for. It wasn't this end all be all. It wasn't a gold standard for graphics processing that they envisioned. So it failed
Mm-hmm.
pretty miserably. And what we see is Steve Jobs, he believed in it still. And so he's using literally his own money. That first $10 million check, that's one thing, but he continues to feed this bleeding company until it's successful. And so, 1986, he starts it out and they fail, they fail, they fail. But eventually they realize, okay, the hardware side of it is not where it's going to be. You talked about the Next Cube. The Next Cube was this beautiful machine that was focused on aesthetics as well as functionality. I mean, we see that over
Mm-hmm.
and over with Steve Jobs. And I'm sure he probably had a little bit of an input in there as well with the machine that Pixar was trying to put together. But both Next and Pixar, well, I'll speak to Pixar, they looked at it and they said, nobody's buying it. Nobody's buying this. So they made a shift. And what was
Mm-hmm.
the shift that they made? They shifted to, let's focus on software. Let's focus on putting together the software that's needed in order to handle the graphics that we're needing to render. And so what do they call it?
You tell me.
RenderMan, right? So
RenderMan.
RenderMan. And so they start developing RenderMan, and they put out this short video. The short video, I believe, is called Tin Toy. Is that right?
Yeah. They have a couple different films. First one, they really put out The Adventures of Andre and Wally B. And they put that together as sort of a demonstration of what they could do. You watch that back today. I encourage everybody after the podcast today to go on YouTube and punch in The Adventures of Andre and Wally B and just watch the animation. And they thought at the time, wow, we can't even tell that that's computer animation. So they were really excited about it. And you will be able to tell that it's computer animation. But at the time, it was really cutting edge.
So Tin Toy, they won an Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film in 1989, March 29th of 1989. And it was essentially a proof of concept of this is, like you were saying, this is what it can do. But it's still another 7 years until the drop of Toy Story. So we still got some time. They still have a whole lot more work to do, but they're getting there. They realized the hardware aspect of it may not be where it is that we want to be. Let's get into the software aspect. We can use other people's hardware So they were using predominantly Sun Microsystems, these very large, very expensive machines. I was reading they were $20,000 a piece, and they had a whole bunch of them. And
Mm-hmm.
so they had these very expensive machines running RenderMan and developing the RenderMan technology to put into Toy Story. I mean, they didn't know about Toy Story at the time, but they're developing this and actually at the cutting edge of the animation technology, the way that Steve Jobs envisioned. He saw it as this perfect intersection of technology and art and bringing technology
Mm-hmm.
and art together to the best that he knew how. I was digging into this and trying to figure out why did he buy Pixar? And the only consistent thing that I found over and over again was he just loved that intersection of technology and art. What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's easy to think he bought or invested in what becomes Pixar as a movie studio for the arts. And really, that's not necessarily the case. He's obsessed with the art of what hospitals can do with it, what manufacturing companies can do with it. And he's just continuously pushing on that, trying to get that to work, trying to get that to go. And it's just not, right? As we talked about. And the animation team at Pixar was a small team. 2, 3 people maybe. And they didn't really anticipate that animation was going to be their core business, right? And then they come out with that example film. It's a hit, it's crazy, it's at the time unbelievable. And then we jump forward again to 1995 and Toy Story, the first one, comes out. And this is really the first fully computer animated feature film. And unlike the $100,000 Pixar machine, this one is a huge hit. It really drives Pixar just through the clouds. It's kind of the catalyst of their IPO. Once this comes out, everything is going very well over there. And Jobs actually becomes a billionaire through what he owns of a $10 million investment.
So the funny thing about that with the Pixar situation, they had an agreement with Disney to make Toy Story. Disney owned all of the characters. Disney funded a lot of the actual movie, but Steve Jobs was very business savvy, if you will, and he dropped the IPO, if I'm not mistaken, just a week or two after the drop of Toy Story. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So a
Yeah,
week
it
or
was
two after the
strategy.
drop of Toy, yeah, it was amazing business strategy. And so what you see is the emergence of what we know now of this Steve Jobs business tycoon. He's kind of stepped back and he's no longer hands-on with this Pixar development because he doesn't know animation. He doesn't know a lot of the ins and outs of what's going on at Pixar. He's very hands-off on the day-to-day, but he knows how to run a business. And so he is at the table with these Disney execs, the figurative table, if you will, playing this chess game of how to make it so that they can keep Pixar running the way that they need to keep Pixar running. And so this is the only time, or one of the only times that I've ever seen where Disney is partnering with another production studio, very much so almost a startup production studio with very few assets, where they almost have the same equal footing at the table as Disney. So it's like Pixar and Disney. So they were able to gain enough money and momentum from that IPO that Pixar can now have creative control of the future animation of the Pixar studio. They are not at the beck and call of the major conglomerate of Disney, which is once again just that's Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs does not want to be at the beck and call of anyone. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would even say not just doesn't want to be, but just simply will not be. Never have we seen that work out. If he's not making the decisions, he's just terrible to work with. It's just not going to work, right? And I think he's really kind of proving himself as a business strategist in this case, like you mentioned, Sean, and he's picking up traits that I think really start to shape what we see when he rejoins Apple, which we'll get to. He's still working at Pixar, not day
He's the
to day.
CEO of Pixar, and he's
Yep.
also the CEO of Next simultaneously, right?
And he's spending most of his days at Next trying to get Next to work out, which the employees of Pixar are very glad about because he's not there every day yelling at them or making the environment stressful. And so he's continuing to try to make Next work out. It's not working. And they develop kind of an interest in moving away from hardware and moving into software. So they start developing Next Step, which is just insanely advanced software for the time. And it's really kind of a successful product in terms of capabilities, but it's not successful commercially, even still. And he's continuing along, just trying and trying and trying. He doesn't want to be seen as a failure, doesn't want this to fall off. He's again convinced after Toy Story that he's kind of this strategic genius, and really we've seen that being proven to be the case. And he thinks, why can't I handle this? Right?
So, something else that I saw was when they shut down the hardware division of Next, he lost 2/3 of his Next employees.
Mm-hmm.
2/3 of all of his Next employees. So that idea of, hey, I don't want to leave Apple and be seen as a failure, that has to be, he's got to really be feeling that right now, right?
Yeah. I mean, not a great time for him. And I mean, I wouldn't put him as somebody who's innately focused on the well-being of his employees necessarily, but I do believe that probably started to have some effect on him, especially since some people came over from Apple with him to work on this next venture, and he feels like maybe he kind of let that down a little bit.
So you've got the next what is this operating system called? Next Steps.
Next Step.
Okay, Next Step, and it's a Unix-based system, right? And so, what I understand is it was a phenomenal software, but it didn't necessarily have a machine to live on.
Right.
Is that kind of where we see the problem?
Yeah. So we did not really have a spot for this to live. The Next Cube was not kind of up to the commercial success task to host something like this. And they have a lot of things going for this operating system. They kind of have multitasking, which is sort of a first. You have things like protected memory, where if an app that you're working on, a big task crashes, your whole machine isn't going down. You're not losing other things, which you'll see is a critical thing that comes to Apple in the future. He's developing things like an even more advanced graphical interface than he had on the Macintosh, and even that Apple has on their computers at this same exact time. Because we can't forget, Sean, they're still over there in Cupertino making not just computers, but tons of products. And Next, the software is kind of outperforming Mac OS, which is not really kind of on anybody's mind because they can't sell it, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, so Apple is struggling without their innovative genius. Next is struggling without a platform to have their software. And so what's the logical next step?
The logical next step is M&A. So Apple goes forward with some strategies I guess taking a quick step back before this strategy, Steve considered having Next buy Pixar to kind of keep both afloat. The employees at Next shot that down, didn't want that, wasn't interested. The other investors said no. So that did not happen. Although Steve would have liked it to, it did not happen. And then in 96 and 97, Apple and Next come to the table in merger talks. Apple wants to buy Next. That's their next step.
So I was looking this up. The project that was failing at Apple is referred to as Project Copeland. And so Project Copeland, this project that they're working on, they're trying to accomplish exactly what it is that you were just talking about. They're trying to accomplish the multitasking. They're trying to accomplish the protected memory. They're trying to accomplish these things that Steve's already accomplished. Steve's already figured this out in this next step software. And so Steve's got this already, all packaged up, all pretty, all ready to go, just no place to go with it. And Steve's like, hey, I've got this. I can't do anything with it. Maybe I can partner with Pixar. Maybe I can bring these companies together. Like you said, ultimately didn't work out because the next people didn't want it. And so you're looking at Apple's failing without Steve Jobs. Where's Wozniak in this whole situation?
He's kind of stepped back. Apple, kind of, when Steve left Apple, things changed for him. Wozniak felt pretty screwed by Steve Jobs and the whole thing. And so Woz is kind of stepped back a little bit. And he's kind of working on some of his own projects. And then really we get into this era of negotiations for purchasing. And it's often easy to think, looking back, that Apple bought Next just to get Steve Jobs back, which is partially true, but they also put this deal together to buy the operating system and the engineers who have figured out this great software and all these features like the protected memory feature, multitasking, object-oriented development software on their graphic interface, everything else.
1996, is that correct? This is right around when this is happening. So Steve Jobs has been away, has been exiled, essentially, from Apple for 10 years. He's been exiled from his baby. He's got no ownership stake in this company at this point in time. He's got no reason to see, I want to see Apple succeed. There's no upside to him, except for it's his. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So he has, he's still kind of bruised by the whole thing, and he thinks, okay, I can come back and I can turn this back into something that I want it to be. And when he gets there, Apple is licensing software to just junk machines. It's really kind of tearing down the Mac OS. It's just ruining the reputation that they built. They're trying every sort of machine you can imagine. They're ugly. They look like every other PC. They have cameras. They have printers. They have scanners. They have all this just what he considers to be nonsense. And so he
sounds
comes
like Hewlett Packard machines from the early 90s.
And that's right. They Apple at the time, the leadership said, this is what other people are doing. This is what we ought to do too. Bill Gates is very successful licensing out Windows. We should compete with him. We're losing market share, not licensing out Mac OS. So they put it on all these junk machines, and it just sort of ruins it. And they're having a tough time. And Steve Jobs comes back and he stands up in front of the employees of Apple and he draws 4 quadrants on the board. And he says, we need one product in each of these. And he starts crossing things out, and they end up with a personal computer, a personal laptop, a business computer, and a business laptop. And that's all they have.
Pre-acquisition, what's going on with Pixar?
Pixar is putting together pre-acquisition of Next, or...
Yes, pre-acquisition of Next, because I'm thinking, hey, let's have a second conversation, because after the acquisition of Next, I feel like that's a whole separate conversation from,
Mm-hmm.
let's just look at this exile period. Steve Jobs was exiled. He was kicked out of his own company for being difficult to work with, or not kicked out, but pushed out, strongly, slightly, gently
Mm-hmm.
pushed out for being difficult to work with, for the Mac not hitting those benchmarks that they thought it was going to hit. Things weren't going the way that they needed to, and he's exiled for 10 years, and these 10 years of exile, some people refer to them as the wandering years, but I think what we're really seeing right now is these are his formation years. These are his years in the crucible. I look at Pixar, and I can't help but think that Steve Jobs, with his background, was looking at Pixar and saying, hey, they're developing a machine for animation. I've got this background in machines. I can help them. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't say that anywhere. There's nowhere that says that Steve Jobs was going to try to help Pixar. Part of me thinks, well, maybe the reason why it doesn't say that anywhere is because his pride is too big to say that he wasn't able to help them. The truth is, when he got to Pixar, he was so in over his head.
Mm-hmm.
These machines, the animation, he's probably looking at this and saying, I can't do a daggone thing to help them. They are doing something so far beyond my comprehension. The only thing that I can do to help this thrive is to let them do what it is that they do, and for me to do what I know how to do.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think he really thought he could come in and just kind of use his visionary aspects that he's used before. And I think he just realizes it doesn't work. And I think his biggest contribution to Pixar honestly becomes his investments and his kind of stubbornness on never giving up on them, especially as they're struggling through the later period of the 80s into the 90s before they release Toy Story. And then once we see they release Toy Story, then they start coming out with more movies all the way up until Disney buys them a little bit later in the 2000s. But really just putting money into it, never giving up, not trying to fold it into Next when people were against it. I think that really kind of showed that Steve was acting in interests other than his own, which is a little bit different for him at the time.
Right. He's, for the first time, really able to see he's got his own place in this business, and the place that he has is as the visionary on the business side. He didn't believe that he was the visionary on the business side in Mac. He thought that he was the visionary, the tech development side. But we see at Next, the tech development didn't go quite the way he wanted it to. The hardware
Mm-hmm.
development. At Pixar, the hardware development didn't go the way that he wanted it to. And so in this exile period, he really only has one success, one real success. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and the one success is him recognizing this is my place. I've got a seat at this table in Disney, and I can negotiate these terms in such a way that it's profitable for the company. And he remains the CEO of Pixar until the day he dies, which is absolutely amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Even as he starts running in parallel again with Apple.
Right. And so he's really able to come into his own as a business person. And so when they're starting to see, oh gosh, Steve Jobs is not just a tech visionary. Steve Jobs has business acumen. Steve Jobs can actually run a company. That's where the mindset of maybe we should bring him back to Apple.
He's grown up a little bit.
He's grown up a little bit. He's no longer this
Mm-hmm.
30-year-old kid. Maybe
That's right.
he's mellowed out a little bit. Maybe he's easier to work with. the truth is he probably wasn't any easier to work with.
I don't think he's necessarily easier to work with, but I think he's listening better. He's kind of allowing some other people to give their ideas, and he, at this period, really starts changing his mind a little bit easier than he did before. And changing his mind not because he wanted to, but because somebody else brought something to him that was worth considering. So I think he grows up a little bit, and he's no longer just kind of tormenting employees. It's working out for good this time.
What else would you like to chat about with his Exile years before we kind of wrap this episode up?
I think we really did cover it. I think just some final thoughts on those years was he really comes out of Apple being really disappointed that his baby, what he founded in the garage with, Woz and the others, was kicking him out, and he feels really burned by that. And he's very hard to work with. There's not one person who would say that I enjoyed working with Steve Jobs. Yes, it's fun to work with him as he's a genius and he's a visionary, but day to day is tough. And I think at Pixar, he slowly softens up. He has a failure or a couple failures. Things don't work out the way he wants to at Next. And I think that really sort of opens his eyes to maybe he's not undefeatable. And I think he softens up a little bit. He grows up for sure. He starts listening. He takes on some different perspectives, and he really just matures a little bit.
I learned a lot digging into, all the literature preparing for this, and I didn't realize everything that he had to do with Next and with Pixar. The one thing I dug into a bit more was I thought that there was more overlap between Pixar and Next, and really there wasn't much of any overlap. Pixar might have used some of their computers, but not for the animation aspect. The machines that Pixar was using were predominantly Sun machines. The Next machines had a very specific purpose. The Next software had a very specific purpose. The Pixar had a very specific purpose. And all of these purposes had that end user in mind. Now, the other thing that I dug into a little bit was how successful was Toy Story compared to RenderMan. And so RenderMan, after Toy Story, it was considered essentially the gold standard of animation rendering software. And it would take, I think that I was reading, they could render roughly 30 seconds a day, 30 seconds of video a day.
And that's huge.
That's huge. On the machine that I'm on right now, I could render the entire Toy Story video probably in about an hour and a half, if not quicker. But they have the gold standard of rendering software, and it is used for several years throughout the industry. It's pretty widely adopted, but they realize the real money is in the IP of the characters that they're developing, the animation that they're developing. And it's this beautiful picture of Steve Jobs bringing together art and technology. And I don't think that there's a more beautiful picture of Steve Jobs bringing together art and technology than Toy Story. What are your thoughts?
Maybe you could argue the iPod is another great example of that. But yeah, no, I think Toy Story is definitely the first one that we see. And it's an inspiration for future products where he's focusing on the benefit of the art and craftsmanship rather than just technology.
And that's really what sets Steve apart, is we're not just throwing components into an ugly box. We're selling an experience. We are selling this opportunity for the end user to have something beautiful that they are working with and that they are working on. And so I think that's one of the things that Pixar really did for him. So, well, that's really all that I've got for his Exile time, but I'm looking forward to our next discussion where we talk about him post-Exile.
Yes, back to Apple We hinted at it a little bit today, and next episode, we hope you'll join us back to hear the rest of the story. But until then, thanks for joining us. We hope you had a good time with our conversation, and we'll talk soon.